And we're live.
All right, thank you for joining us this afternoon. This is a meeting of the Joint Committee on Fair Practices and State Personnel Oversight. And I'm joined by my House co-chair, Delegate Barron, as well. It has been a few months since this committee has convened. Obviously, we had a very busy 2021 legislative session intervening in between, and many of us on this committee as legislators were very active during that time and as part of that effort. However, as most folks will recall, Mr. Ward Coe was brought on board to continue this investigation as part of the committee's effort, and he has certainly been very busy in the interim as well. As most folks will recall, this is a very serious matter as it pertains to the severance of the former director of MES, who went on to serve as the chief of staff for the governor. And the legislature did take steps to address some of the issues that came forward as part of our earlier parts of this investigation that came to our awareness. And we did pass legislation that our colleagues had sponsored and also championed to be able to address some of the shortcomings that we found back then. But it's still important to have a full understanding and accounting of what had occurred. And so we appreciate Mr. Coe's continued efforts in this regard, and that's why we're continuing to have this hearing. From our perspective, I think, the allegations that were alleged earlier are concerning, and as we learn more and as more of the investigation is pulled back some of the curtains behind what had occurred, I think there are more concerns that we continue to have. And so what we will see, I think, is expanded testimony from Mr. Harris, who's come forward before, as well as a concerted effort to doctor the meeting minutes of the MES board, which is deeply disturbing, particularly as a legal document and official record of what was discussed. It certainly appears to point to an effort to subvert the truth and intention to deceive, particularly if there was nothing untoward that was occurring. Why would there be such a difficult effort or challenging effort to change the official record? So with that, let me turn it over to my House co-chair for his remarks, and then we'll continue on. Delegate Barron.
Thank you, Senator, and good afternoon, everyone. I thought it might be nice to just very briefly summarize for anyone and those in the public who are only just now tuning in and may not be privy to our work this year and last year and how this started. Last year, the House Speaker and the Senate President and the Bipartisan Legislative Policy Committee asked this panel, this committee, to look into why Mr. Mcgrath, Mr. Roy Mcgrath, was allowed to take a substantial amount of money, along with other allegations of waste, fraud, and abuse, as he left the Maryland Environmental Service and went to the governor's office. The Maryland Environmental Service is an independent state agency. Specifically, we were tasked to review why this was permitted to occur and who reviewed this, quote, severance package, and what constraints should be put in place to prevent this from happening at any independent state agency in the future. This past session, as you heard from Senator Lamb, with the support of the presiding officers, the General Assembly moved aggressively to pass House Bill 2, which is sponsored by one of our committee members, Delegate Mark Corman, and cross-filed by Senator Cory McCray. That bill mandates a series of reforms to this agency, the Maryland Environmental Service, and those reforms are already underway. But we still don't have the entire picture of what happened, and we hope to learn more today from the committee's outside counsel, Mr. Ward Coe, and today's witness. So with that, Mr. Coe, if you and your team are ready, can you start us off with an update?
Yes, thank you, Chairman Lamb, Chairman Barron, members of the Maryland General Assembly Committee on Fair Practices and State Personnel Oversight. We have subpoenaed Michael Harris, former treasurer and managing director of finance of MES, to testify today and he is here remotely with his attorney, Stuart Berman, of the firm of Lurch, Early and Brewer. I'm going to give you a brief update on some of the investigative steps we've taken in this interim. We've interviewed a number of MES and former MES employees. They include additional interviews of Acting Director and Deputy Director Beth Woyton and board member Joseph Snee. We obtained some of Mr. Mcgrath's phone records, and Ms. Woyton and Mr. Snee voluntarily provided us with their records for May of 2020. With these records and interviews, it is clear that prior to the May 28th, 2020 board meeting of MES, when Mr. Mcgrath's severance was approved, Mr. Mcgrath called both Ms. Woyton and Mr. Snee and brought up the issue of his severance. He began with a call on May 22nd to Ms. Woyton and talked to her for a specified duration of some length to advise Ms. Woyton that he was leaving to become the governor's chief of staff, that he expected a severance of a year's salary, that the governor was aware of the proposed severance and did not object. He called Mr. Snee the next day, May 23rd, a Saturday, and had a lengthy conversation with him on that day. He had numerous additional conversations with Ms. Woyton about the severance, all prior to the MES Human Resources Committee meeting on May 27th, 2020, at which meeting the severance was discussed, and prior to the board meeting on May 28th, where that information, the governor's, the fact that the governor was aware of the severance and had no objection to it, was imparted to other directors and became material to their decision to approve the severance. We also have determined that Mr. Mcgrath advised Ms. Woyton prior to the board vote on the severance that he would be taking a pay cut by moving from director of MES to the chief of staff position for the governor. And he said that in the context of discussing his severance. We interviewed former chief of staff for the governor, Matt Clark, and requested documents from the governor's office related to Mcgrath's communications regarding his compensation as chief of staff, and the governor's office cooperated and produced the documents. They show that, in fact, Mr. Mcgrath negotiated for a salary successfully equal to his MES salary and received an offer letter confirming that salary on May 20th, 2020, before his communications with Ms. Woyton, that he would be taking a pay cut. Ms. Woyton communicated that information about the pay cut to other members of the Human Resources Committee. Finally, after Mr. Harris testifies, I will briefly present to you a timeline and some exhibits showing an attempt by Mr. Schering and Mr. Mcgrath to alter the MES board minutes dated May 28th, 2020. Both the open session minutes and the closed session minutes relating to the board's approval of Mr. Mcgrath's severance and the representation that the governor knew about it and had no objection. With that, I think we're ready to proceed, if there are no questions at this point, to testimony by Mr. Harris. And I would request that he be sworn as a witness. Madam Court Reporter, can you swear Mr. Harris as a witness?
Could you raise your right hand, please? Do you hereby solemnly declare or affirm under the penalties of perjury that the testimony you will give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? You're on mute.
I do.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Court Reporter. Good afternoon, Mr. Harris.
Good afternoon, Mr. Cole.
Thank you for being here today. I understand your attorney, Mr. Stuart Berman, is also here with you, and you are in his office today?
That is correct.
Okay. And for the record, will you simply state your name?
Michael C. Harris.
Okay. And you were the Managing Director of Finance at the Maryland Environmental Service during the period October of 2017 to October 2020, correct?
I was the Managing Director of Financial Performance initially in October of 2017, and then was promoted to the Managing Director of Finance around March of 2018.
Okay. And continued in that position until October of 2020?
That is correct.
Okay. And you were also Treasurer of the Maryland Environmental Service from April of 2018 until the end of your tenure there, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. You graduated from Virginia Commonwealth University in 2001 with a degree in accounting, is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. I'm going to have presented to you on the screen Exhibit 1, which I believe is a resume of yours.
Yes, that is my resume.
Okay. I want to go down to the third page of the resume, your first job after graduating from Virginia Commonwealth. Okay, there it is. Your first job was as an accounts receivable accountant for PRA International for
Yes,
about
sir.
8 months, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then your next job was as a staff accountant for Armed Forces Benefits Association for about 1 year and 8 months, is that right?
Yes, sir.
And then you became a staff accountant for DEVA for about 8 months.
Yes, sir.
And then you became a staff accountant at the National Association of Chain Drugstores for about 2.5 years.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And at NACDS, you met Mr. Mcgrath, correct?
Yes, sir. That is correct.
And you became social friends with him?
Yes.
He also introduced you to Matthew Schering during that period of time, correct?
Not that period of time. I did not meet Mr. Schering until years after I left the National Association of Chain Drugstores. I'm not sure how long between the period that I left and meeting Mr. Schering, but I did not meet Mr. Schering or work with him at the National Association.
Okay. You met Mr. Schering through Mr. Mcgrath, correct?
That is correct.
After you left NACDS, you stayed in touch with Mr. Mcgrath, correct?
Periodically, sometimes 6 months, sometimes a year, maybe 2. Not, too frequently. It just depended on, just timing.
Okay. And after NACDS, you worked as a senior accountant at the National Industries for the Severely Handicapped.
Yes, sir.
That was for about 5 months.
Yes.
Okay. Then you worked as a senior accountant for Rushmark Properties from February of 2007 until August of 2010.
That is correct.
Okay. And that was in the real estate business, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. You next worked as a senior accountant for Fulcrum IT Services for about 4.5 years.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I guess from the name, that's the information technology business, right?
It is a government contractor, and yes, in the information technology sector.
Then from January of 2015 to April of 2017, you worked as the Director of Finance and Operations for Community Care of Community Care Network of Virginia.
Yes, sir.
And that's in the hospital and healthcare industry.
Yes.
That was essentially a one-person finance accounting department, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And I understand the annual revenue was about 5 million. Is that right?
I'm not 100% sure, but I guess sounds about right.
Okay. And there were about 30 employees?
Yes, approximately.
Okay. And then from May of 2017 until October of 2017, when you went to work for MES, you worked for Gateway Homes, which actually is not on this resume.
That is correct.
Okay. And that provides transitional residential treatment for mental health services, correct?
That's correct.
And its revenue is around $11 million a year, is that right?
I would assume so. I'm not 100% certain.
Okay. And approximately 15 to 20 employees, is that right?
They're actually more than that, but I'm not sure of the amount right now.
No more than 30?
I'm not 100% certain. I don't.
Okay. You were director of finance there, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. I want to show you Exhibit 2. This is your LinkedIn page, is that right?
I believe so.
Okay, can you scroll down, please? It shows at the top your position at MES, correct?
Yes.
And it shows the community care position. It does not show the gateway position.
Yes.
Do you know why that is?
I'm not for certain why I didn't.
In July of 2017, you and Mr. Mcgrath began discussing you're potentially coming to work at MES. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay. And who contacted whom?
I'm not 100% certain as to who contacted who in July. I think it was him contacting me in July.
Okay.
But I might have sent him my resume at some prior date.
Understand. Let's go to Exhibit 3. Mr. Harris, these are text messages between you and Mr. Mcgrath in the July of 2017 time period, which you provided through your attorney, Mr. Berman, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And let's go to page MH72. Okay. Starting down at the bottom. Okay, the first entry, there's a redacted portion there, and then a response from Mr. Mcgrath that he looks forward to seeing you. Did you contact Mr. Mcgrath and ask to talk to him about a job at MES?
I do not remember. I don't recall.
Okay. Did Mr. Mcgrath tell you that there were jobs available at MES for you?
Around the time frame of July, he didn't say a particular job was available. He said he might have an opportunity, I think.
Could you speak up just a little bit, the audience a little bit?
Mr. Mcgrath didn't say he had a specific position open for me, but he did express a potential opportunity, not a job opening as I'm aware of at that time.
Did he say what the opportunity was?
It will be around the area of finance.
Okay. Let's go to 071. These are more text messages between you and Mr. Mcgrath, and I wanted to focus you to the Mcgrath text saying you headed up yet, and your response, yes, just left. You and Mr. Mcgrath arranged to meet around July 28th, 2017, correct?
Yes, I assume based on that text, yes.
Okay. And if you scroll down to the top of page 72, at the top, this is a continuation of the text on July 28th. Your text is, I'm in the poker room. I'll wrap it up when you get up. And a little below that, you ask where Mcgrath is, and he responds, craps. So were you at a casino?
The MGM, I think.
Where is that located, sir?
National Harbor.
So you arranged to meet Mr. Mcgrath at the casino at National Harbor?
I guess that's where we said we would meet and talk.
Again, could you speak up a little bit?
I think that's where we said we would meet and talk.
Okay, where did you meet at the National Harbor?
At the MGM?
Okay, so actually in the casino?
Yes.
Okay. And was it just you and Mr. Mcgrath?
I think he had a friend of his with him.
Who was that?
Miss Laura Brunner.
Could you say the name again, please?
Laura Brunner.
And was she an MES employee?
No.
Okay. Did she participate in the discussion with you?
No. Mr. Mcgrath and I talked, and she was off to the side.
Okay. And what did you and Mr. Mcgrath talk about?
Just a potential opportunity. You
So
know,
what did Mr. Mcgrath say the potential opportunity was?
like I said, something in the area of finance.
Was he any more specific than that?
I don't recall.
Okay. Did he express any dissatisfaction with the current employees of MES in the finance area?
Yes, a little.
Did he express dissatisfaction with Janet Irwin, the CFO and treasurer?
Yes.
What did he say? What was his objection to her?
He didn't really say, he didn't go into any detail. I just could tell he was not satisfied with her.
Did he say he was looking to replace her?
He might have brought that up.
At some point, he did bring that up, correct?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And did you say why he wanted to replace her?
No.
Let's go to MH70, please. These are additional texts which show you following up in August with Mr. Mcgrath. And I wanted to focus on the one where you say on August 22nd, good morning. I just want to remind you to send a copy of the financials.
Yes.
Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And Mr. Mcgrath did send you the financials, correct?
Yes, he did.
Okay, let's go to page MH 105. He also sent you the organizational chart.
Yes.
Okay. And did he ever explain to you where you would fit in on this chart?
If, you know, I guess eventually, possibly in the treasurer CFO spot.
Possibly in what?
Possibly, you know, in the chief financial officer position, but
Okay.
he didn't guarantee me that job.
Okay. But he said that was an opportunity.
Could have been a possible opportunity. He didn't say for certain it was. Not that I can remember.
Okay. And there's no position here for managing director of financial performance, is there?
No.
Eventually, you were offered a job for the position of managing director of financial performance.
That is correct.
And that job was created for you by Mr. Mcgrath, correct?
Yes, it was.
The next several pages are financial documents from MES. Those were documents Mr. Mcgrath sent to you?
I believe so. Looks familiar.
Do you know why he sent these particular financial pages?
He was giving me an overview, a snapshot of the financials related to MES.
Okay. Did you find them useful?
Yes, usually when you look at financials, you can tell basically how the organization is operating from a financial perspective.
When did Mr. Mcgrath offer you the job as Managing Director of Financial Performance?
I do not recall.
Was it on the phone?
I mean, I don't recall. I mean, we're talking 2017. I know I got an offer letter, but I don't know if the offer letter preceded, was after the phone call or after a phone call.
Okay.
But I know I received an offer letter on September 28th.
We'll get to the offer letter in a minute. Let's go to in Exhibit 3, MH68. And I want the entry with Mr. Mcgrath. Are we still planning on 10/18? So, do you have that? Okay. Mr. Harris, I want you to look at this entry. Mike, are we still planning on 10/18? If so, 3 weeks is 9/27. Have to you a day or two before, just a formality at this point. That's talking about the offer letter, correct?
Yes, I would assume so.
Okay, and I believe the date of this is September 6th, 2017. You scroll up. So prior to that, he had offered you the job of as Managing Director of Financial Performance, and the offer letter was a formality, correct?
I would assume so. I couldn't remember the dates. Like I said, it's been
Yeah, I understand. I don't expect you to. That's why we have the documents to help you. At that point, had you met anyone else from MES?
No, not that I can recall.
Okay. And then if you scroll up to the first entry on September 6th, he tells you, hey, Mike, we have a staff meeting, an all-staff meeting confirmed for 9/27, 8:30 to 1 in Glen Burnie near BWI. If you can make it, it would be worthwhile. So he was inviting you to an all-staff meeting, correct?
Yes, sir.
And you actually attended that meeting, correct?
Yes, I did.
How many people attended that meeting?
I would say it was all MES's staff.
All executive staff, did you say?
It was all staff.
It was all staff, so 800 employees attended?
I wouldn't say quite 800, but probably close to it.
Hundreds of employees attended?
Yes, yes.
Okay. And there he introduced you as the new Managing Director of Financial Performance, correct?
Yes, he did.
Okay. What did he say about you?
I can't recall.
Okay. And you actually had never met any of the other MES employees before that meeting, correct?
No, sir.
My question was ambiguous. I don't know whether your no, sir means you had met.
No, I have not. I did not meet any other MES employees prior to that date.
Did you meet Janet Irwin at that meeting?
I wouldn't say, I guess briefly.
Okay. Did you meet Beth Woyton at that meeting?
I did meet Beth at that meeting.
Okay. And she was the chief of staff. Is that right?
I think so.
Okay. All right, let's go to Exhibit 4, please. So you mentioned an offer letter. I'm showing you a letter from Ms. Woyton to you dated September 28, 2017. Is this the offer letter that you were referring to?
It looks like it, yes, sir.
Okay. And the next page in this exhibit actually has your signature on it.
I'm not.
I think if you scroll down, I'm sorry, 2 pages on it has that's your signature on the offer letter, correct?
Yes, that is
Okay.
my.
And you started work on October 18th, 2017, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. I want to show you Exhibit 5, please. That's actually your application for employment at MES, correct?
Can you scroll down? I'm not.
Yes.
Yes, that is my application.
Okay. And if you'll scroll down to the 3rd page, please. Okay, that's your signature on the 3rd page, correct?
Yes,
Okay. And you actually filled out the application for employment on your first day of work, right?
yes, I did.
Who asked you to do that?
Probably human resources. This is something that I've seen a lot over my career, where an employee's offered a job and then they fill out the application as part of the paperwork when they start their initial during their initial start date. I'm sorry.
Okay. And then if you'll scroll down to 2 more pages. Here, your supervisor is identified as Roy Mcgrath, correct?
That is correct.
So you were managing director of financial performance, but you didn't report to Ms. Irwin. You reported directly to Mr. Mcgrath.
I reported to Mr. Mcgrath for, yes.
Okay. And he actually signed your application down at the bottom, right?
I'm not sure whose signature that is.
Okay. When did Mr. Mcgrath tell you that he intended to replace Janet Irwin with you?
I do not recall, but Ms. Irwin left voluntarily and took another position sometime in early 2018.
Right. She left in January of 2018. But at some point, Mr. Mcgrath told you that he intended to appoint you treasurer, correct?
Not treasurer. I don't know if that was discussed. I know the chief financial officer position was discussed, and I would assume the treasurer came as part of that position. So, and I'm not certain on when it was discussed, the timing around that.
Okay. Did he tell you that the governor had to approve your appointment as treasurer of MES?
I don't recall that being discussed.
Okay. By December of 2017, did you know Governor Hogan?
No, not personally. No.
And
I knew who he was.
right?
I didn't know.
We all know who he is. But you were a Virginia resident, right?
That is correct.
Okay, and you voted in Virginia, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Did Mr. Mcgrath inform you of Governor Hogan's fundraiser on December 7th, 2017 at the Baltimore Hilton?
Yes, he did.
Okay. Did he tell you that you should attend and contribute to Mr. Hogan?
He told me I should attend. I guess whatever the amount was a ticket price or contribution. I'm not quite sure what it is, but he did ask me to attend.
Okay. And you did attend that event, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And if you will go to Exhibit 6, please. You can scroll down to the contribution page. Okay, whoops. This shows a contribution to Larry Hogan for governor in the amount of $1,000 on December 14th, 2017, correct?
Yes.
That's a contribution you made?
Yes.
Okay. And if you will scroll up to the entry just before the large redacted portion. Whoops, that's it. This is an additional text exchange between you and Mr. Mcgrath. It's redacted above it, so I'm not sure what the date is, but in it you say, "Good morning, Roy. I took care of my donation this morning. Hope you're feeling better, Mike." You're advising Mr. Mcgrath of your donation to Governor Hogan, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that was because he solicited that donation, correct?
He asked me to attend. Yes, sir.
And did he also, if you'll scroll back down to the other donations, please. Did Mr. Mcgrath also solicit the $250 donation and 2,000 donation?
Yes.
Did he tell you why you should make those donations?
No, he didn't tell me why. Not that I can remember, but at that point, you know, he was my superior. He did ask me to attend these events, and I think it would have probably put me in an awkward position if I said no.
Okay. And why do you say that?
I just think because, you know, your superior is asking you to go somewhere, and I'm, you know, fairly new at that point in my job, especially in December. So I didn't know how that would be received. And when you go down to the 125, 2019,
Right.
actually, I was asked along with other leadership within Maryland Environmental Service to attend, and I wasn't able to attend because I had pneumonia at the time.
Right. When you say you were asked by Mr. Mcgrath?
Correct.
Okay. Did Mr. Sharing also join in asking you to make contributions?
I'm not sure. I don't remember. I don't remember if he did, but I know he was at the 12th 2017 event.
Did Mr. Mcgrath make it clear to you that you should make these contributions if you wanted to maintain your job at MES?
No, he didn't say that, but I just felt like, you know, if you're a supervisor, ask you to contribute or be a part to attend an event, then you should do it.
Okay. Let's turn to Exhibit 7, please. So Exhibit 7 is the board minutes for the Maryland Environmental Service meeting on April 19th, 2018. I just wanted to scroll down. I'm just doing this for chronological purposes, Mr. Harris.
Okay.
To the line just before agency activity report. So I'm looking at the line, Mr. Michael Harris was sworn in as treasurer of MES yesterday. And that's correct. You became treasurer in April of 2018, correct?
I'm not sure the date, but that sounds about right.
Okay. And as treasurer, you would from then on, you attended board meetings?
Yes.
Okay. So your job included at some point approving Mr. Mcgrath's expense reports, correct?
That is correct.
And Mr. Mcgrath told you that you would have that job, is that right?
He did ask me to do that. Yes, sir.
Okay. At one point, Ms. Irwin had been approving his expense reports, correct?
I'm not sure who approved his expense reports prior.
Okay. And when did you start approving his expense reports?
Time period of 2018, 2019. I can't remember specifically.
Okay, we'll show you the specific reports and get that date.
Okay.
When he told you that you would be approving his expense reports, did he tell you why he wanted you to do it?
No, he didn't tell me why.
Did he tell you what authority you had to reject any of his requested reimbursements?
No, he did not. I assumed that him being my supervisor, he did not report to me. So I assumed that I was only checking for receipts and backup, not approving where he traveled, when he traveled, or what was spent.
So you told Mr. Mcgrath that?
No, that's what I assumed. I'm not.
Oh, okay.
He didn't tell me anything.
Did Mr. Mcgrath tell you any criteria you should use in approving his expense reports?
No,
Did he tell you what kinds of expenses he would incur?
no,
Did he ever tell you anything about his philosophy on spending for the organization?
no,
Did he ever tell you he believed in being frugal?
he was definitely, I was more frugal than he was. I can say that.
Okay. And why do you say that?
Um, just because that's just in my nature.
Okay. So you believe your role was limited to determining whether there was appropriate backup.
Yes,
Okay. And you didn't think you had any authority to approve it, disapprove an expense reimbursement because there was no apparent nexus to MES business, right?
definitely not.
You never questioned them about any expenses nexus to MES business, did you?
No, I did not.
And you didn't believe you had any authority to disapprove an expense because it wasn't in compliance with MES policies, right?
No, I didn't think I had the authority. And, you know, I guess based on past history, I don't know of anyone that's ever rejected an expense report from Mr. Mcgrath. I mean, I could be missing something, but I'm not sure if anyone has rejected an expense report.
When you say based on past history, what are you referring to?
Miss Irwin was approving his expenses for a period of time. And I'm not sure if she rejected anything.
Did Ms. Irwin tell you what criteria she was allowed to use
No,
in reviewing expenses?
I know there were, they exceeded, or Mr. Mcgrath exceeded per diem, and Ms. Irwin had to put her initials on any receipt where he exceeded per diem. But other than that, she didn't give me any other criteria. And she didn't give me criteria anyway, because she was gone when I stepped into the role after.
Again, it may be the equipment, but your voice is dropping off a little bit.
Where did I lose you, Mr. Cole?
Okay. No, it was okay.
Okay.
It tends to, when your answer goes on, it tends to drop off a little bit.
I'll make sure I lean into the computer screen.
Good, thank you. You never did reject a reimbursement request from Mr. Mcgrath for any reason, did you?
No, sir.
Okay. So let me show you Exhibit 8. This is the MES meal reimbursement policy, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I guess the point of meal reimbursements is that if you're out of town or work overtime during meal times, you're entitled to have the organization pay your meal up to per diem, right?
That's what the policy states. Yes, sir.
Okay. It's not intended to cover everything you consume other than at meals, is it?
Not based on this policy.
Okay. And let me just refer you to 1A. I'm sorry, Roman numeral 4A. It states that meal reimbursements are not to exceed the rates established by the state of Maryland Budget and Management for state employees on travel status. You didn't hold Mr. Mcgrath to that standard, did you?
No, when I stepped into the role, as I mentioned, prior to me, it was initialed by our prior CFO when Mr. Mcgrath exceeded per diem. So I don't think anyone held him to that standard.
That last statement I could not hear. Could you say?
I don't think anyone held him to that standard. The prior CFO initial receipts that came in for meal reimbursements and other items, and they exceeded per diem as well. So I'm not. It was a policy that seemed to be a little loose as far as I'm concerned.
Okay. And was that for all employees or just the director?
I'm not sure about other employees because I never really saw their expenses. I saw Mr. Sharing's when I initialed receipts when he had meal reimbursements the same way.
Same way, meaning exceeding per diem?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And let's go down to Roman numeral 4I. Mr. Mcgrath was not held to the time requirements for submitting for reimbursement either. Correct?
Yes, that was another loose policy, Mr. Cole. Most employees were given flexibility, not as much as Mr. Mcgrath, but they weren't held to that standard.
Okay. And then let's go to Exhibit 9. This is the travel reimbursement policy for MES, correct?
Yes, that's what it states.
And again, portions of this were not applied to Mr. Mcgrath, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Specifically, number 5, he wasn't strictly held to the backup requirement, was he?
For most items that I saw, I think they had receipts on them. They had receipts attached. I don't recall if there were any other instances of that.
And look at 8 and 9. Again, he wasn't required to comply with the time policies, correct?
No, he did not comply with the time policy.
Okay. So I wanted to just get your observations of Mr. Mcgrath in the office. At first, you reported directly to him. Is that right?
Yes, for a few months I reported to him, and I think, like I said, around January, it might have been sooner, I started reporting to Ms. Hoyt.
Okay. And did that continue to the end of your tenure? Well, until Ms. Wharton left?
It continued until the end of her tenure.
Okay. And with respect to Mr. Mcgrath, before the pandemic, I think you told us in an interview that he was in the office between 0 and 5 times a week.
That's a correct depiction. I mean, it just depends on week to week. I mean, some weeks you didn't see him, and some weeks he was there maybe 1-2 days. So it just depended from week to week.
Okay. And you attempted to meet with him at least once a month to review finances, correct?
Correct.
And sometimes that happened and sometimes it didn't, right?
That is correct.
Okay. He directed that communications with him be by text. That's correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And after the pandemic, you communicated with him less than once a week by text, right?
Yeah. I mean, some weeks I didn't communicate at all, but my primary communication was with Ms. Hoyton because she was my direct supervisor. So
Right.
unless she and I were sharing, financial information once a month, or he reached out to me for something specific, I wouldn't have much communication with him.
It was MES's policy that employees had to have expenses reviewed and approved by someone other than themselves, right?
I would assume so, yes.
Okay. And after, well, can you tell the committee what Workday is?
So Workday was our financial HR platform that we adopted that we implemented around June of 2018 or 19. Not sure on that. And what that did, Workday tracked or took expense reports. We paid our bills through Workday. We billed our clients. We hired and recruited employees through Workday. So a number of items.
Okay. So let me show you Exhibit 10. This may help you with the date. And let's just scroll through this from the beginning. So who is Katie Tessier?
Katie was an accountant working in accounts payable.
Okay. And if you go to her email dated July 24th, 2019, she points out that after Workday was installed, Roy's expenses were circling back to him for approval.
That is correct.
They should go to you instead.
Mr. Mcgrath requested that I approve his expense reports, and the way Workday is set up, he was located at the top of the organizational chart with no supervisor above him. So everything went to him for approval. He had no one in the supervisory role approving his items.
Okay, I'm going to scroll up to Mr. Harris's email on July 24th, 2019. So you sent an email straightening that out, and it was straightened out, correct?
Yes.
So that the expenses came to you for approval, not back to Mr. Mcgrath.
Yes, and that was for audit purposes.
That was for what?
Yeah, that was for our financial audit purposes. When they do a test, if they see an expense report going to an employee for approval, for self-approval, then that could flag an audit, concern or write-up.
Okay. And you also approved his timesheets, right?
That is correct.
Okay, let's go to some expense reports. First of all, I'm not going to go through all the email traffic, but you, on a regular basis, reminded Mr. Mcgrath to turn in his expense reports and timesheets, right?
Very regular.
Okay. And he was slow in doing both, right?
Yes.
And what he would do is save up expenses for a long period of time and then turn a whole batch in at once.
That's correct.
Okay. So let's go to Exhibit 11, please. So this whole package is a series of expense reports. And I just want to make sure that I understand and the committee understands what happens here. On this occasion, in the date column, August 27th, 2018, Mr. Mcgrath submitted 8 different expense reports, right?
Yes, it looks like it.
Okay. And the total was $15,942.64.
Yes.
And he was reimbursed for all of them.
Yes.
Okay. So if you go to the first report, which is the next page, it's report number 699560. It shows that he submitted it on August 27th, 2018, and you approved it on that date, right?
That is correct.
Okay. And as I understand from your prior testimony, you didn't review any of these expenses for a nexus to MES business.
No, they were input by the accounts payable department. They just, like I said, they didn't look at them to see where he went, where he was going. They did indicate if per diems were exceeded, but it wasn't in any of our purview to approve or deny based on business purpose because we weren't privy to that information.
Okay, so just so we understand mechanically how it would occur, Mr. Mcgrath would somehow transmit to the accounts payable department his receipts. Is that right?
He would give them directly to an employee in accounts payable. She actually put together the expense reports for Mr. Mcgrath. He signed off on it, and then I would approve it.
Okay.
That was with the paper.
And who was the employee?
Kate Tessier put together the expense reports at the request of Mr. Mcgrath.
Okay. And just to give you an example here, just a couple of incidental expenses. Just go down to the Walgreens. Walgreens receipt. So I'm just showing you a Walgreens receipt for a bottle of water and a dental kit. Are those typical expenses that employees at MES would seek reimbursement for?
I'm not sure. I'm not for certain, but I don't think they would.
Okay. Let's go to report number 699561. So this is another in the package where the report was submitted by Mcgrath on August 27th, 2018, and you approved it on that date.
That is correct.
Okay. Let's go to 699562. This again was submitted by Mr. Mcgrath on August 27th, and you approved it on that date.
Yes, sir.
And then 699563. Same thing, submitted and approved on August 27th,
That is
2018.
correct.
So on this particular one, if you'll scroll up just a little bit, there's a purpose of travel section, which lists events on June 3rd, June 10th, June 13th, June 14th. But up on the columns, there's reimbursement sought for June 23rd, 25th, and June 25th. But there's no purpose of travel on that date. Did you notice that when you reviewed this?
No, I did not.
Okay. So let's go down and look at an airline ticket. This is an airline ticket from BWI to JFK and back to DC on June 23rd and June 25th. Do you know why Mr. Mcgrath was traveling to New York on that date?
Not that I can recall.
And if you look at the next receipt, it's a W Hotel. Okay, so this is a receipt for stay at the W Hotel on Albany Street in New York City on June 24th and 25th. Do you know why he was staying there?
Don't remember.
Okay, and the number of guests is 2. Do you know why? Do you know who else was with him?
No, I don't.
Do you know why he was charging a room for 2 people to MES on that date?
I'm not sure.
Okay, if you'll scroll down to another receipt, so I'm okay, that's it. I'm showing you a Sauce and Barrel receipt, apparently a restaurant in New York on June 25th, 2018, where there are 2 guests. Do you know who Mr. Mcgrath's guest was?
Not that I can remember. I know I don't know if that was the period of time we went to New York for the bond issuance. So I'm not sure, but If
Okay.
that's not the date, then I'm not sure who was with.
And Mr. Mcgrath didn't discuss the purpose of his travels with you, did he?
No.
Let's go to 699573, please. Again, that was submitted and approved on August 27th, 2018, right?
Yes.
Next is 699585. I'm sorry, 584.
Yes.
Okay, again, submitted and approved on August 27th, 2018. So this was, the purpose of this travel was March business travel to Orlando. Were you aware that this was a trip to go attend the Disney Leadership Conference
No.
in Orlando? It actually was a 4-day trip. You can see that from this report. Right?
Yes. Looks like a 4-day. Trip.
Okay. And I want to scroll down to a particular receipt. It was of interest. This is August 27th, 2018. This is these are two receipts here. They're not for a lot of money, but one's Pinocchio's and the other's Main Street Bakery and Disney Parks. And if you look at the next page, which is his hotel receipt, the two items are listed. They're both in Magic Kingdom Park. That's actually I don't know this because I've never been there, but the research we have, that's actually a park inside Disney World. Are you aware of any MES nexus to Mr. Mcgrath going to Disney World and
No.
charging MES for food there?
No, sir.
And his timesheet for that day showed 12 hours of work for MES. Were you aware of that?
No. I don't recall. I don't recall.
Let's take a look at 699585, please. Again, this is submitted and approved on August 27th, 2018.
Yes.
And then the last is 699586, which is the same thing. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And just to summarize, you delegated to Katie Tessier in accounting the responsibility to make sure that appropriate receipts were there. And if they were, you would sign off on these forms approving Mr. Mcgrath's reimbursement requests. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And you never questioned Mr. Mcgrath about any of it?
No.
Okay. Let's go to Exhibit 12, please. So let's scroll down to the approval page. This is a reimbursement request for an amount of $4,164 for tuition. It was submitted again by Catherine Tessier and approved by you, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And do you know what that course was for?
I do not recall.
It shows, there's some backup that shows an MBA, courses for an MBA at the University of Maryland. Were you aware he was taking the course there?
Yes, I was aware he was pursuing his MBA.
Okay. Let's go to Exhibit 13, please. Okay, this is an expense reimbursement request for $4,802.20 for leadership meeting expenses that you approved. Do you know what that was for?
I don't recall.
Okay. And again, you relied on Ms. Tessier to make sure appropriate backup was present?
Yes.
Okay. So when you learned that Mr. Mcgrath was moving on to the chief of staff position for the governor, you knew that he had not submitted any expense reports for quite a long time, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And you communicated with him to get the expense reports in and get his timesheets in, correct?
On a constant basis.
Okay. Let's go to Exhibit 14, please. And go to the second page here. At the top. So I'm looking at, again, your text messages with Mr. Mcgrath. And this is June 1st, 2020. The one, Mike, I just got a workday termination message. So Mr. Mcgrath's last day of work for MES was May 31st, 2020, right?
Okay.
I'm
not sure of the exact date on that. Before I say yes, I'm not 100% certain.
Okay. And what does it mean that he got a workday termination message?
Well, Ms. Hoyden and myself, we talked about terminating him in the system because he could not stay in our workday system after he left the agency or left the organization. He advised that he needed to have his account left open because he needed to submit his expense reports. I encouraged him to possibly revert back to the paper. He insisted that he wanted to do it electronically. So that's what that means. And when we terminate, and the entire termination process started because, and that was around his severance. In order to process a severance payment, then an employee has to be terminated. There's certain steps you have to go through to terminate them out of the system.
I understand. So he communicated to you that he wanted to keep his access to Workday open
until he finished his expense reports.
Okay. And you encouraged him to do it by paper, but he insisted on doing it electronically?
Yes.
Okay. And just scrolling down, you continue to discuss this subject, but down to your June 4th communication to him, can you explain what you're saying to Mr. Mcgrath here? He still hadn't gotten his expense reports in, right?
No, he has not. And at that point, we were running close on our payroll deadline. And if we did not get all of those items taken care of related to Mr. Mcgrath, it would have held up payroll for the rest of the employees at MES.
Okay. So basically you're telling him he's got to get the reports in ASAP.
Yes.
Okay. Now, this was June 4th at 7:47 a.m. And I want you to identify a couple of employees. You've already identified Catherine Tessier. Who's Stephanie Acosta?
She's the managing accountant. She's the accounting manager, and she manages payroll and accounts payable.
Okay. And who's Jennifer Brown?
She works in accounts payable.
Again, Mr. Harris, could you keep your voice up?
She works in accounts payable.
Okay. And did you inform them and Ms. Tessier that Mr. Mcgrath would be submitting expenses on June 4th and that they would have to process them?
Well, Ms. Tessier was out on vacation. Mr. Mcgrath submitted those expenses in the electronic form. Something was going on in the system and they were held up for some odd reason. So I asked Ms. Brown and Mr. Costa for their assistance in getting those done so we could prepare and get ready for payroll.
Okay. So what was happening was Mr. Mcgrath was electronically submitting his expenses. Acosta and Brown were working on putting them into reports. And
Well, he keyed those himself, Mr. Cole.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
He keyed those items into the system himself. They were just checking receipts and things like that.
Okay. But who was actually generating the reports?
The report is generated once he completes the receipt and once, complete the receipt. Once he completes inputting the information, a report is generated and then it's forwarded through the process for approval.
Okay. And this was occurring on the evening of June 4th, right?
Very late in the evening, yes.
And you were the one to inform Ms. Acosta and Ms. Brown they'd have to work to get it done, right?
Well, I didn't tell them they had to work to get it done. I asked them for some assistance to get it done so we can complete payroll.
Right, okay. Okay. So I want to show you Exhibit 15, which is an expense report at number 1704. This is one of the expense reports on June 4th, 2020, as for tuition in the amount of $5,250.
That's correct.
Okay. And you approved that report, correct?
Yes, because it was part of the large process.
And it was, this tuition was the tuition approved by the MAS board as part of Mr. Mcgrath's severance.
That's correct.
Okay. Do you know what it was for?
No, not right offhand. I would assume it's for the MBA program that he was pursuing at the University of Maryland.
Okay. And I want to scroll down to the next page to Stephanie Acosta's email to you dated June 4th. See
yes.
that?
Yes.
So she asked you the question, what should be included regarding the board of directors approval?
Yes.
And then your response is?
She could use the email as approval until I got my hand on the receipt.
Okay.
Because it was approved by the MES board.
Okay. And why did you make the statement there shouldn't be anything included in reference to the board?
I didn't want to include the board minutes in there because, there was sensitive information in there. So that's what I meant by that.
Okay. Let's go to Exhibit 16. So go ahead and scroll down to the, actually, let's get the top here because where it says expense report A. So what I'm showing you now, Mr. Harris, is expense report A, which is one of the four major expense reports that Mr. Mcgrath submitted on June 4th, 2020 in the evening. And you're familiar with that document, aren't you?
Yes.
Okay. And this was generated in the way that you described, with Mr. Mcgrath electronically submitting the expenses, Ms. Brown and Acosta reviewing what he was submitting, and the report being generated for your approval, right?
That's correct.
Okay. So let's go to where the signatures, where the approvals are. Okay. So on this expense report A, down at the bottom here, there's an expense report event, status step completed by Jennifer Brown at 8:36 in the evening.
That's
Right?
correct. Yes.
Okay. And step completed means the review is complete?
I'm not 100% certain. I haven't been
In any event, the report is in a form that it can be submitted to you for approval.
Yes.
Okay. And you approve it at 8:39, correct?
Yes.
And you didn't actually review the report at all, did you?
But I actually did a cursory review. We were on the phone at the time, and we all were in the system from what I can recall. So it wasn't like she submitted it and I took like 3 minutes. I looked through some of the receipts.
Okay. When you say we were on the phone at the time, who are you talking about?
I was talking to Ms. Acosta and Ms. Brown.
Were you also communicating with Mr. Mcgrath during this?
I don't recall.
Okay. And the actual receipts in report A range from December 22nd of 2018 to March 26th of 2020. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the total was $21,697.43.
That's correct.
So let's go to Exhibit 17, please. So this is expense report B on June 4th, 2020. And if you scroll down to the approval, the report was completed by 8:02 p.m., right?
Yes.
And it was approved by you at 8:17.
That's correct.
Okay. And the date range for these receipts were June 19th, 2019 to November 25th, 2019.
Can you
Sure.
scroll? Yes.
And the total amount was $13,611.77.
That's correct.
So let's go to 18, please. This is report C on June 4th, 2020. Right?
Yes.
Okay. And let's scroll down to the approval. The expense report was completed on 8:19 p.m.
Yes.
and your approval was 8:21.
Yes.
And the receipt dates on this range from February 6th, 2019 to December 10th, 2019.
Can you scroll up?
Yes. Mhm.
Yes.
Okay. And the amount was $6,413.74.
Yes, sir.
And let's go to report D. This was completed on June 4th at 8:17, correct?
Can you scroll down?
Sure.
Yes.
Okay, and your approval was 8:19 on that date.
Yes. Just as the case with the others, I was looking through, like I said, doing a cursory review, and then when they were finally submitted, I hit the approve button.
And that cursory review was just simply to see that there were appropriate receipts.
Yes.
And this report, the charges were from March 8th of 2019 to April 23rd of 2020.
That's correct.
Okay, and the total amount was $14,160.38.
Yes.
So on June 4th, 2020, between, I'm just going back through the times, between 8:02 p.m. when report B was submitted and 8:39 p.m. when report A was approved, Mcgrath reports were completed and approved in a total amount of $55,888.32.
Yes.
And I want to refer you back to exhibit number 14, please. The next to last page of the exhibit. No, so I'm sorry, third from the end. It's Friday, June 5th, 2020. So this is again is an email, I'm sorry, text message exchanges with Mr. Mcgrath,
Yes.
and you report to him on Friday, June 5th. Hi, Roy, we processed your expense reports and you should see those funds in your account today. Thanks, Mike.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
That's correct.
So he would have gotten his reimbursement on Friday, June 5th. Not only of the A, B, C, and D expenses, but also the tuition reimbursement.
That's correct.
Now, switching to another topic. Did Mr. Mcgrath ever tell you that he was taking an executive education course at Harvard for a cost of $14,475?
He did not mention that to me. The first I heard of that was when I guess Mr. Sharing might have submitted a report, and it was part of that expense report.
Okay, so why don't we show you that report then? This is Exhibit 20. Is this a report you're referring to?
I think it may be, yes.
Okay, why don't we scroll down so you can be sure? So there's the Harvard invoice. And there's, let's go to the sharing submission. Go down to the approval. Okay, next one. Okay, this is Mr. Sharing's expense report that includes the Harvard tuition.
Yes.
Okay, so I just wanted to go through this with you. Originally, well, the first line here is step completed by Matthew Sharing on May 29th, 2020. You see that?
Yes.
So that means he has submitted this expense for reimbursement.
Yes, sir.
And then the approval by manager is by Roy Mcgrath.
Yes.
Okay. So he was approving his own Harvard tuition.
In essence, yes.
Okay. And then if you go down about halfway, there's an expense report event, which is status withdrawn. What happened there?
I think that last expense didn't have the receipt, and Ms. Tessier flagged it and might have rejected it, and then they had to resubmit it.
Okay.
I approved that one for $400. I think
Okay.
it was.
And then so that was just for the $495 expense?
Yes.
Okay. The two lines farther down is approval by manager, status reassigned, and then Ray Rubio. Which expense was he approving?
Ray Rubio wasn't approving. He didn't approve anything.
Okay.
He just reassigned because it looks like Mr. Mcgrath might have been terminated from the system at that point, because the note in the right, kind of midway through the page, said Mcgrath no longer works for the agency.
Right. So why is Mr. Rubio on the approval by manager line?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
And it might be because he worked in IT and he had to reassign the approval steps in the approval process, but he didn't approve anything.
Okay. Did you ever discuss with Mr. Mcgrath why he was attending a course at Harvard that cost $14,475?
No,
Do you know whether he actually attended?
no, I do not know.
And in any event, on this date, he was no longer an MES employee when MES was paying for this tuition.
That is correct, but I think the date of the invoice is during a period where he was, so I'm not sure if he took the course then or not.
Okay. At any time, if you ever talked to Mr. Mcgrath about this course?
Not that I can recall.
All right, let's go to Exhibit 21, please. So, Mr. Harris, these are the minutes for the Board of Directors meeting on May 28th, 2020. And you attended that meeting, correct?
Yes, sir.
I want to refer you to the last page of the minutes, a paragraph that starts with Mr. Snee. Now, there's a paragraph that says, Mr. Snee, as chair of the Human Resources Committee of the board, initiated discussion regarding the compensation of the director who would be leaving his position. Can you just read that paragraph to yourself?
I completed it.
Okay, that's an accurate description of the action taken by the board on May 28, 2020, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
And let's go to Exhibit 22, please. So these are the closed session minutes for May 28, 2020, and you attended that closed session, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I want to again refer you to a paragraph on the second page that starts, Mr. Snee is chair of the Human Resources Committee. Okay. So I want you to read that paragraph to yourself.
Mr. Cole, I'm sorry. This is the paragraph where Mr. Snee is.
Okay, let me just read the paragraph, okay?
No, which one? If it's Mr. Snee as chair of the Human Resources Committee, I read that one.
Okay, you've read that paragraph?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That paragraph is also an accurate description of what took place at the closed session, isn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and specifically, it's accurate that Mr. Snee stated Mr. Mcgrath requested the board approve a severance payment, like the severance that the board had approved for the two prior directors. And that Mr. Snee stated that he had told Mr. Mcgrath that he would not recommend that a severance payment be made unless the governor was aware of the proposed severance and did not object. That portion is accurate, isn't it?
That is accurate.
And it's also accurate that Mr. Snee stated Mr. Mcgrath had assured Mr. Snee that the governor was aware of the proposed severance payment and did not object.
I think that is an accurate depiction. I don't remember if it did not object, if that wording was used, but I know the governor being aware was used.
Okay.
That language was used.
And before these meetings, you actually talked with Beth Boyden, the deputy director, about Mr. Mcgrath's request for a year's severance, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you were surprised about the request because he was going directly to the governor's office, correct?
Initially, I was.
Okay. And later, did you change your mind about that?
Sir, did he change his mind about being surprised? If you can just clarify the questions, please.
Okay. Yeah, you said you were initially surprised. Did that impression change later?
Not that I can think of.
Okay. Beth Boyden also told you that Mr. Mcgrath said the governor was aware of the request for the severance and approved of it, correct?
I think that is an accurate depiction.
And on May 28th, you voted in favor of the severance because you believe the governor was aware and approved of it, right?
That's accurate, yes.
Let me show you Exhibit 23. This is an email exchange between Mr. Mcgrath and Stephen Schatz in the governor's office, and you are not included on these emails, but I've provided them to you prior to this session. Starting with Mr. Schatz's email on May 8th, 2020, take whatever time you need to look at it. Mr. Schatz basically states because of the economic impact of the pandemic, he asked Mr. Mcgrath whether MES can agree to delay or suspend or extend payment terms for government entity partners, right?
Yes, that's what that email states.
And Mr. Mcgrath responds, take whatever time you need, but I'll summarize it. He responds, no, basically because of MES's cash position.
Okay.
Do you agree with that?
I think MES had a strong cash position at that time. I think the uncertainty of the pandemic, left some things into question. But when I spoke with Ms. Hoyton in regard to the severance related to Mr. Mcgrath, the information that I had at the time that was that MES did have sufficient cash to pay that severance payment.
Well, I'm not asking about the severance. What I'm asking about here is Mr. Mcgrath's response to Mr. Schatz. He essentially refuses Mr. Schatz's request because of MES's cash position, right?
Yes, he does.
Okay.
I apologize.
Were you aware of this exchange at the time?
No.
Okay. And do you agree with Mr. Mcgrath's response here?
No, because MES did have cash at the time.
Okay. So there was an all-team meeting at MES on May 26, 2020, correct?
I believe so.
And at that meeting, Mr. Mcgrath announced to all staff that he was moving on to the governor's office as chief of staff, right?
I believe so.
Okay. And you gave a report on the financials and prospects for 2021 at that meeting, right?
I believe so. Yes, based on what you've said to myself.
So I want to just play a little excerpt of that presentation that you did, Mr. Harris. For the committee.
Teammates. Now we're in the planning stages of our fiscal year 21 budget. As Beth mentioned, a result of the COVID-19 crisis is that many of our partners have been deeply impacted both operationally and financially. This will undoubtedly impact our fiscal year 21 budgets and possibly beyond. We must continue to find ways to operate more efficiently to help our customers meet their budgets, and therefore we must remain diligent in our approach. There are a number of actions we must take to ensure we continue to remain financially strong. The first and most important is to hold back on all non-essential spending. This will allow us to reduce expenses and minimize the impact of our partner budget reductions on MES.
Okay, that's good enough. Okay, thank you. Mr. Harris, prior to that was about 2021. Prior to that, you had reported that 2020, also on the results so far in 2020, that it had been, was going to be a record year, I believe. But that was your, that little clip was your statement about proceeding into 2021, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And your statement to staff was that you needed to hold back on all non-essential spending, correct?
Yes, sir.
And At that very time, Mr. Mcgrath was asking for a severance of a year's salary from MES.
That's correct.
There's another issue that came up right just prior to Mr. Mcgrath leaving MES, and that was the vehicle. Mr. Mcgrath had a vehicle assigned to him at MES, is that right?
I don't know if it was assigned to him personally, but it was the vehicle that he had driven the most.
Okay, and what was the vehicle?
I believe it was a Ford Fusion.
And on his last day at MES, did he request to you that the vehicle be assigned to him to go to the governor's office?
Yes, he said he was going to take the car with him.
Okay. He said he was going to take the car with him?
Yes.
Okay. And did he tell you that?
Yes.
Okay. And what was your response?
I don't remember my response, but I did let Ms. Hoyton know. And she encouraged me to get something in writing telling us to transfer the car to him in his new position.
Okay. And so what did you do?
I requested that he send an email to state that,
I'm sorry, again, could you keep your voice up? I think you're.
I requested that he send some type of communication, an email that stated that he wanted to transfer that car out of MES's pool into the pool where he was going with his new chief of staff position.
Okay. Did anybody at MES have to approve the transfer of the vehicle?
I recall in the final paperwork that it had to be the director, and this was during the time where Dr. Glass was the director and he did not approve it.
He did not approve it.
That's correct.
Okay, so the vehicle was eventually recovered.
Yes.
Okay, and I want to show you some text messages between you and someone named Don.
Yes.
This is Exhibit 25. Who is Don?
Don worked in our fleet department.
At MES?
Yes.
Okay. I want to refer to the July 14th, 2020 text. I think it's from Don to you. Got an idea if Roy parks his car at Government House? You see that email? I'm text. Okay. He goes on to say, puts me on list to pick up car for cleaning. Does that mean that Mr. Mcgrath was having Don, an MES employee, clean his car after he left MES?
Yes.
Okay. And reading this text, does it mean, do I understand that he would actually take another MES vehicle and make it available for Mr. Mcgrath while he cleaned Mr. Mcgrath's vehicle and then switch him back?
Based on that text, yes.
Were you aware that that was going on?
Based on his text.
Okay. You aware of any other services MES was providing to Mr. Mcgrath after he left?
I want to say he called me about, something regarding where the car was parked, and it being towed, but I'm not aware. I don't recall any additional services.
Okay. So in August of 2020, there was a Sun article about Mr. Mcgrath's severance, and he actually communicated with you to get some information from MES and how to respond to that. Do you recall that?
He did ask me about several severance payments. Yes.
Okay. So let's turn to Exhibit 26, please. There's a text dated August 19th where he asks you when O'Neill left. And do you know who O'Neill is?
Mr. John O'Neill, the former deputy director,
Okay. And you provided him with that information?
said he left in 2017, yes.
And he also asked for confirmation of Beth Woyton's severance, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And did you provide that information?
I told him it was not 153,000. Yes.
Okay. There's another text above that on August 24th where you say, "Hi, Roy, any luck locating the receipt we talked about for $105.28? Do you know what that's about?
It was one of the receipts that was missing in the expense report. The batch of expense reports that he submitted that was discovered, and I told him that we needed it.
Do you know, is that the receipt that he?
Yes.
Okay.
Looks like the receipt.
So let me go to Exhibit 27, please. Mr. Harris, on November 1st, 2019, Julia King from the Office of Legislative Audits emailed Mr. Mcgrath with a copy to you, enclosing a letter to Mr. Mcgrath dated October 31st, 2019. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Okay. And this related to two allegations received by the Office of Legislative Audits hotline regarding MES, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And one of the allegations was an allegation on potentially unnecessary travel expenses by an executive employee, right?
Yes.
And that employee was Mr. Mcgrath, right?
It didn't say specifically who they were referring to, but I would think it would be Mr. Mcgrath.
Okay. Let's look at Exhibit 28, please. On November 1st, Mr. Mcgrath responded that you would be designated to review the matter, correct?
Yes,
And he copied you on that.
that's correct.
And you were either out of the office at the time or for the next week. But you understood you were designated to look into the matter.
I was designated to get the details of the matter.
Okay. Well, it says you were designated to review the anonymous matter with you on our behalf.
Yes,
Okay. That means review it with Ms. King, right?
that's correct.
Okay. And Ms. King, in fact, contacted you and discussed the matter with you, right?
Yes,
Okay. And I want to refer you to exhibit number 29. This is an email from Ms. King internally at the Office of Legislative Audits, where she refers to her conversation with you. She made it clear that the complaint about unnecessary travel expenses were about Mr. Mcgrath, correct?
I think, I don't recall 100% if she did, but she did go into detail around the specific allegations in the letter. And I don't know if Mr. Mcgrath's name was mentioned or not.
Again, you're fading out.
I don't recall if Mr. Mcgrath's name was mentioned directly, but he was the only executive at the time that, traveled more than others. So I would assume it was him.
Okay. She also said it was MES's responsibility to investigate, correct?
I found that out the summer, the past summer that I left in 2020. From my understanding, that's what it was. MES was supposed to investigate.
Well, didn't she tell you in the phone conversation with you that it was MES's responsibility to investigate these allegations?
I don't recall.
Did you report to Mr. Mcgrath on your conversations with Ms. King?
I reported to Mr. Mcgrath and Ms. Whiten on both of those.
And what did you tell them?
I gave them the specifics of the allegations.
And what specifics were they?
From what I can remember, excessive executive travel, increased overhead spending, contracts. It was something related to a contract with a former board member. And then the other was related to, I can't remember what that one was related to.
Okay. And you say you discussed this directly with Mr. Mcgrath?
Yes.
And who else?
Ms. Hoyt.
Okay. Were they together at the time?
No.
Okay. When you discussed it with Mr. Mcgrath, was it shortly after your conversation with Ms. King?
I believe so.
What did he say to do about it?
He didn't tell me to do anything about it.
Did you ask him what you should do about it?
I presented the findings to him, and I don't recall saying, what should I do about it?
Well, you say you presented the findings. You presented what Ms. King communicated to you?
Yes.
As to the complaints?
Yes.
Okay. Did you recommend that MES look into it?
I spoke with Ms. Hoyten, and it was around not only those complaints, but we had just wrapped up a legislative audit and said that it would be a good idea. She and I agreed that it would be a good idea to at least contract with an internal and have an internal audit done.
And when did you have that conversation with Ms. Wood?
She and I had that conversation. It was after these allegations and shortly after the Office of Legislative Audits issued the audit findings as a result of the legislative audit. And then we started talking to our audit firm around March of 2020 about some possible things we would like them to look into for an internal audit.
And who was that audit firm?
RSM.
Okay. Who at RSM?
I think it was Valerie, but I don't remember her last name, and another person that was responsible for doing or conducting internal audits.
And when you said we talked to them, you talking about Ms. Wood and you?
Well, I think it was primarily me talking to them at the time.
But Ms. Wooten agreed that you should be talking to RSM about this.
She agreed that we should be pursuing an internal audit since we didn't have an internal audit.
Did you, either you or Ms. Wooten, clear that with Mr. Mcgrath?
Not that I can recall.
Okay. And what became of the potential engagement of RSM in March of 2020?
Well, we never engaged with them because that was during the time that COVID had just happened and we were moving everyone home. So we never circled back with them on that engagement.
Mm-hmm. So after you reported the King conversation to Mr. Mcgrath, did Mr. Mcgrath ever check back with you about whether there had been any investigation of the allegations?
Not that I can recall.
Did he have any comment to make about what the allegations, about the substance of the allegations?
I don't remember if he had any reaction to the substance. I don't.
Did they have any response to the comment that there was excessive executive travel?
Not that I can recall. It might have, but I don't recall.
Okay. So do you recall that after Ms. Wooten left, she sent an email to the board regarding concerns about Mr. Mcgrath's expenses?
Yes.
And the board became concerned and hired RSM to do an audit?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And let me refer you to exhibit number 30, please. Let's just start back at the beginning of this chain. This is an email exchange among Ms. Leslie Jackson Jenkins. She was chair of the audit committee at MES, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and you and Dr. Glass in July of 2020 following Ms. Wooden's email.
Yes.
It begins with an email dated July 27th from Ms. Jackson Jenkins to Valerie Coleman at RSM regarding a potential audit. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. And so in this email chain, you have an email dated July 29th, 2020. The next one, it's at 3:31 p.m. Okay, that's it. This is both to Charles, Dr. Glass, and Ms. Jackson Jenkins, where you say that you should add the deputy director and managing director travel and reimbursement in FY20, consistent with information received from Roy. What are you referring to when you say information received from Roy?
I did not recall.
Okay.
I know he.
I'm sorry.
I know he. I don't know if it was through Mr. Sharing or someone else found out about the audit. Might have even been because he talked to a board member, but he said that we needed to include everyone, not just his.
Who's Mr. Sharing said that?
Mr. Mcgrath said that.
And who did he say that to?
He might have said it to me. I'm not sure if he said it to Dr. Glass or not.
But this was after this was when he was chief of staff for the governor.
Yes.
Okay. And did he say why it should be everybody?
No.
And who came up with limiting it to FY 2020?
I'm not sure who came up with that.
In any event, RSM proceeded to do the audit.
Yes, sir.
And were you still at MES while the audit was going on?
Yes, I believe so.
Were you there when the audit results were reported?
I'm not sure. Possible.
Okay. Well, I want to show you Exhibit 31. This is portions of the RSM audit, but only related to Mr. Mcgrath. And if you have you seen this document before?
Yes, I remember seeing it. Yes, I remember seeing it.
Okay. And if you go to the 4th page of the document, I'm not going to go through the details of the exceptions, but this this portion of the document relates to the employee, the former director CEO. That's Mr. Mcgrath, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And the amount, $55,889.12, that's reports A through D that he submitted on June 4th, 2020, right?
Right.
Okay. So it didn't go any farther back than those particular reports.
No.
Okay. And were you surprised that there were multiple exceptions that our SM found with respect to those expense reports?
No, not after I really dug in and reviewed the reports around the time of Ms. Hoyton's email. I was not surprised.
Okay. Have you continued to be in contact with Mr. Mcgrath since you left MES?
Not recently.
Okay. When was the last time you were in contact with him?
I may have spoken with him on my phone in 2020 around September, October. Since then, he sent me a birthday text and I didn't respond to it a couple of days ago.
How about Mr. Sharing? Have you been in contact with him?
It's probably the same. I think I might have spoken with Mr. Sharon earlier this year, but no, I have not remained in contact.
Mr. Harris, thank you very much. I'm turning it back over to the chairs, and the committee members may have questions for you, but I appreciate your appearing and answering my questions. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank you, Mr. Coe. I think we are going to open it up now to questions from the members of the committee. We'll start with the chairs. I'll go ahead and ask some questions first, and then we'll proceed to Chairman Barron. So, Mr. Harris, you had said that you had known Mr. Mcgrath for a while and had been in touch with him even before you were offered the position to serve as an employee at MES, right? And did Mr. Mcgrath tell you that you at some point would be replacing Janet Irwin as the new financial officer in that role before you were hired, or is that sometime after you were already an employee there?
I mean, I don't recall, but we might have spoken briefly before I was hired because you know, he was not satisfied with her.
Okay. Did he give any reason why he was not satisfied with her?
Not that I can recall, Senator Lamb.
And did Ms. Irwin, did you and Ms. Irwin overlap at any time in MES? And did she give you any advice or convey any information about how she was handling these expenses for Mr. Mcgrath and other directors there?
When we overlapped, I was in a different capacity. So no, she did not give me any advice or any guidance on how she handled the expenses for anyone in the executive office at MES.
Okay, so she did not give you any advice, and you were not privy to why Mr. Mcgrath had a preference to remove her as the financial officer and to have someone new come into that role?
No, I was not.
Okay. You also said that you felt like you had no purview or authority to disapprove of any of these expenses. Why was that?
Because, you know, I come from an environment where if a person is the CEO or the executive director, they report to the board. The board tells them, you know, approves their expenses and they submit travel items to the board. Typically the chairman of the board, but me being his support, not even his direct subordinate, I don't feel like I had the authority.
So even though in Workday you were listed as the approver, correct?
That's correct.
You didn't feel that you had the authority, even though you were listed formally in the Workday system, the HR management system, that you had the authority to be able to question or disapprove of any of the expenditures?
That is correct. It was from a process standpoint that I was even listed as his supervisor in Workday.
Okay. So you felt like that was just a formality because there needed to be someone listed in that role, and initially it sounded like it was actually Mr. Mcgrath himself, which was then corrected to be you, I guess. But you still didn't feel that you had the ability to really make a decision or review this in any way. It was really just kind of an administrative, review and approval.
That is correct.
Okay. You also mentioned that most of your direct communications with Mr. Mcgrath were by text message rather than by, I assume, email?
Yes. And that was with that was with all of the executive team. We were encouraged to communicate via text.
And not by email with Mr. Mcgrath?
That's correct.
Do you have any sense why?
No, not that I can recall.
So would you characterize you as receiving most of your guidance and instruction, if it was not verbally to your face directly, it was via text message and not via any other kind of written or digital or electronic written form of communication?
That is correct. It also came in the form of a phone call.
Okay. You also mentioned that you would remind Mr. Mcgrath to submit his reimbursements on a, quote, constant basis. I think those were your words.
Yes.
How often would you characterize as constant?
At least a couple times a month. Could have been more some months, some weeks, but when I saw him, I did remind him regarding his expense reports.
So a couple times a month is almost weekly. You said sometimes more often, right? So something on average, like maybe weekly.
Could be.
Say that's fair? Okay.
In some cases.
How would he respond to that?
He said he would get them to me.
And he would take these seriously?
And he would what? I'm sorry.
He would take these suggestions seriously?
He just said he would get them to me. I don't
know
any further than that.
Why do you think he was so delinquent in getting these reimbursements to you?
I have no idea. I don't know, because everyone else got them in timely.
Okay. So he was the only employee who was this delinquent of all the 800 or so employees at MES.
Yes, I would say yes, but not 100% certain without seeing the rest of the employees submit their expense reports. But he's one of the more delinquent that I've interacted.
Was this well known across the agency?
I'm not sure, but Ms. Hoyton was definitely privy to it because she was my supervisor, and I let her know.
Did you and her ever talk about the fact that these expenses were so delinquent?
We could have possibly. We talked about a lot of things because I was her direct report. So this could have been part of those conversations.
Okay. And at the end, when you approved the $55,000 in reimbursements to Mr. Mcgrath, this was really, I guess, from your perspective, at the 11th hour, right? That if he did not submit these that this would hold up payroll potentially for the entire agency of 800 employees.
That's correct. That's correct. Because there's certain steps that we have to go through, and you can't get payroll to close with items hanging out there, and we were terminating him from the system. So you could not complete the rest of the steps without him getting this last piece into us.
Did anything strike you as suspicious given that he was submitting these many reimbursement receipts at the end? Or did you feel that this was in line given the fact that he was so delinquent on so many other receipts?
I feel like this was in line for the rate at which he submitted the rest of the receipts.
Okay. With the Harvard tuition reimbursement, it appeared from the documentation that Mr. Sharing actually submitted that for reimbursement. And it, at least from my view of that, the documentation there, it looked like it allowed Mr. Mcgrath to approve of that himself. Is that standard for another employee to submit a tuition reimbursement on behalf of someone else?
I typically have not seen that.
Okay, so this could have been one way to circumvent the approval process by having another employee submit the tuition reimbursement, which would then be approved by the employee that's attending that course themselves.
Well, not just another employee, it's your direct report. If you have your direct report approve it, then whatever they submit goes to you and you approve it. So this, not just any other random employee, but your direct report.
Okay. And then with the Office of Legislative Audits, it appears that the auditor contacted you in the late October timeframe to bring to your attention this whistleblower concern that had been reported, correct?
Yes, typically, Senator Lamb, these particular items are shared with the head of agencies. I'm not sure how I became the designee to share the details, but Mr. Mcgrath advised the Office of Legislative Audit to share the details with me, and then I shared the details with him, and also included Ms. Hoyton because she was my direct supervisor.
So I'm just trying to understand procedurally, if OLA is supposed to share the whistleblower report with the head of the agency, but the head of the agency is the one that's actually being whistleblown on potentially, does that not present a potential conflict of interest there?
It does. And at the time, I think the other piece is, and I might have misspoken just now when I said the head of the agency, they could share these also if we had an internal auditor at the time. Because I know when I was at MES, we had an internal auditor. There was a fraud hotline that was located in her office. So these items could have been shared with her under other circumstances, but because we didn't have one, that might have been the reason that they went to the head of the agency.
And when you say an internal auditor, do you refer to an internal auditor that's been hired by MES or an internal auditor that was designated by the state, or what do you mean by that?
MES had an internal auditor on staff for quite some time, and I don't remember when she left. Might have been 2018, but her responsibility was, things like this fraud, waste, and abuse hotline complaints and other items from my understanding and from my recollection.
So the internal auditor, would they have been analogous to RMS in this instance?
Yes.
Okay, so you had an in-house internal auditor that was funded by MES, but was independent, I guess. It was actually employed by someone else to do internal auditing and review of your.
No, Senator Lamb. It worked like this. Because I was the head of finance, when we had an internal auditor, they reported up to the deputy director because a lot of times they were looking into financial matters and I shouldn't have been the one giving them direction.
But this internal auditor was an employee of MES or was not?
Yes. At one point in time, yes, sir.
Whose decision was it to allow the internal auditor position to go vacant and unfilled then after, I assume that this person left, right? Or
Yes.
I guess, can you clarify what happened to that internal auditor?
The internal auditor resigned, and I'm not sure from that point whose decision it was to not backfill that position. I'm not sure. It wasn't mine because they wouldn't have reported to me. So I'm not sure if it was Mr. Mcgrath or Ms. Hoyton. I'm not sure. I'm not sure at this point.
So even though this was an internal auditor, they didn't report to you as your role in the director of finance?
No, not at all. And typically in most organizations, internal auditors report up to someone other than the head of finance.
Mm-hmm. But functionally, you were giving her instructions and she would inform, no, you were not. Okay.
They operate completely independent of the finance department because they have to look into financial matters. And if I'm giving her direction, then she may not be looking into things that she should be looking into.
Did the internal auditor, while she was still here, come across any of these irregularities in Mr. Mcgrath's expenses?
I don't think she was there at the time when he submitted the expenses that are in question today.
Okay, but some of these expenses go back to 2018 and potentially even 2017.
I think they were submitted after she had left.
Okay, so even though the expenses occurred maybe while she was there, they were not submitted, you're saying, until potentially after she had left.
Correct.
And did she give a reason that you're aware of for resigning?
No, because I didn't talk to her. Like I might have said a couple words to her, but she wasn't a person that I interacted with regularly. Okay.
So she resigned, and then there was no effort to bring on someone to fill in that capacity. So in effect, after she left, you had no other internal auditor serving that role.
That is correct.
Okay. And then it appeared from some of the documents that Mr. Coe shared that OLA decided to waive off some of these allegations that were reported through the fraud hotline as, I believe, as unsubstantiated. Was that your impression too? Or did I misread that?
From when I got a clear understanding of the process, if they would do a cursory review and then they would leave it to the agency to do a more in-depth review of those allegations. And, you know, they did look at it, but if it was something that raised a red flag, they would forward it to the proper authorities.
So when you say they would do a cursory review, in this instance, that cursory review was talking to Mr. Mcgrath, who's the subject of the concern, and also to you?
No, I'm not going to speak for them to say how in depth, but, you know, from my understanding, they looked into it and then they would, you know, figure out whether it needed to be pursued any further or whatever the case may be. I'm not sure of their process, but I know they had to have looked at it if they said they're, you know, unsubstantiated.
Do you know if they spoke to anyone else at MES besides you and Mr. Mcgrath?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. And why did you approve of all the $55,000 or so in expenses at the end if you knew, I guess at that time, that there were already whistleblower concerns? OLA's auditors had brought up, accounts of irregularities, and an outside auditor, RMS in this case, was being employed to review these expenditures already. I think you had all that knowledge before you submitted the approval for those $55,000 in expenses.
No, I think you have it out of sequence. RSM was brought on after these expenses were approved, and they looked in depth into the expenses. Now, the Office of Legislative Audit, they said excessive travel, but I mean, like I mentioned before, I was in no position not to approve the expenses. I was not in a position where I could reject those expenses.
Even though at the time you were aware of the whistleblowers' concerns that were brought to OLA's hotline, and OLA had reached out to you and also communicated concerns about the executive director's travel.
That's correct.
Okay. I think no further questions at this time. I'll hand over to my co-chair, Delegate Barron.
Thank you, Senator. I'm going to defer to the committee members for any questions they might have.
Any questions from committee members? Looks like Delegate Corman. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman. Chairman Barron, may I proceed? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Harris. A couple of subject matters of question. First, there was a little bit of circularity in your discussion with Chair Lamb, both at the beginning of his line of questioning and the end of his line of questioning, about your role in approving the expenses. I think most recently you said you were in, quote, no position to evaluate them. And then earlier you said that, you know, the CEO answers to I guess the director, I should call him, Director Mcgrath, he called himself CEO, answers to the board. Weren't you on the board for a number of years?
When I said that, I said chairman of the board. So typically,
He's the chairman of the board.
exactly.
Mr. Mcgrath was also the chairman of the board.
In most situations, the CEO/director would answer to the chairman of the board, not just the board. Because, you know, in my role as a board member, I don't feel like, you know, I still had the authority to reject those.
Okay, did you ever share any concerns about them with your fellow board members?
Not that I can recall.
Okay. I want to go back to something that Mr. Coe covered sort of early, and I apologize if some of this is repetitive, but it was a couple hours ago at this point. Your original position with MES was Managing Director of Financial Performance.
Correct.
And you did not succeed anybody in that role, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so who was performing the job functions before your arrival that you were performing, setting aside the specific titles?
What job function are you referring to specifically?
Well, what were your job functions as Managing Director of Financial Performance?
Okay, when I was first brought in, I was looking at, they had converting their timesheets from paper to electronic, and that was the first project that I was undertaking, and that's where I spent the majority of my time. A couple of other processes I looked at, and I can't recall, you know, right offhand because it's been a while ago, what those were specifically.
So these are not functions that someone else was doing before your arrival. They were for you.
That's correct.
Okay. And again, I apologize if you went over this with Mr. Coe, but was there a written job description that you saw?
I don't recall.
Okay. And was there any kind of written job advertisement that you ever saw?
I don't recall.
Okay. And are you aware of anybody else who applied for the job of Managing Director of Financial Performance?
I'm not aware.
Are you aware of any particular skills or qualifications MES was looking for in the job of Managing Director of Financial Performance?
Not aware.
Okay. And you yourself had no formal interview with MES?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part of
Did
it.
you have a formal interview for the position with MES?
Not a formal interview where I went into the office.
Right. Did you submit your resume or cover letter or references to MES?
I might have sent my resume to Mr. Mcgrath at some point in time, but I don't remember doing any references or anything like that.
Okay. When HR had you fill out the job application after you started, did you include with that your resume and references and cover letter or anything like that?
I don't recall.
Okay. So you were recruited and hired basically independently by Mr. Mcgrath over text messages, phone calls, and the craps table. Is that more or less a summary?
I wouldn't say the craps table, but I did have a few phone calls and maybe text messages with him.
Okay. Are you aware of others at MES who had a similar entry into the agency?
Not right offhand. Maybe Mr. Sharing.
Right. And you mentioned that you met Mr. Sharing sometime between your previous employment with Mr. Mcgrath and your time at MES. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And then just to refresh my memory, Mr. Mcgrath asked you to attend a few events on behalf of the governor.
Well, he didn't say on behalf of the governor. He just asked me to attend a few events.
I'm sorry. He asked you to attend a few events that benefit the governor's campaign or his inauguration.
He didn't mention the benefit of the governor. He just told me about the event. He didn't, mention benefiting the governor or anything like that. But like I mentioned before, he asked me, and he at the time was my supervisor. And like I said, me being new, I didn't know if it was like part of my job or what the case was.
Right. I don't want to get too caught up in this, but you were aware that you were not going to a cocktail party, that it was a fundraiser event, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
Okay. And you're referring to Mr. Mcgrath as your supervisor, which he surely was, but I mean, he was also Miss Wharton's supervisor. So do you think that if he had asked her to go, she would have felt the same views, putting yourself in her shoes, the same pressure?
I'm not sure. I think he might have asked people, others to attend events.
Yeah. He also asked you to, sort of help him with his expenses at various times and getting those all processed.
He gave me the receipts and I would give them to AP and they would process them.
Yeah, and towards the end of his time, or really after the end of his time at MES, I mean, you worked pretty directly with him to get large scale expenses reimbursed, correct?
Well, that batch of expenses, I had to work with him to get those done, like I mentioned before, because if not, then that would have held up payroll. So yes, I had to get those done.
Right. So, I mean, Mr. Mcgrath hired you sort of through a sideways process and then asked you to do a number of things, over the years, the events, the expenses, perhaps other things we haven't discussed here. Did you feel that your loyalty was to MES or was it to Mr. Mcgrath?
I didn't have loyalty to Mr. Mcgrath. I was there performing my job in accounting, which Mr. Mcgrath expenses were a very small portion of my actual job function while I worked for MES. So it wasn't loyalty to either one. It was performing my job.
Right. A small part of your job function, but a surprisingly large amount of MES expenses, to be honest with you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Thank you.
Are there questions from other members of the committee? Senator Benson, do you have a question? Do you have questions?
Yes, I do.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony this afternoon. I just wanted to ask this question. It seems to me that there was a time, wasn't there a timeline for the expenses and to be submitted? Wasn't it? It seems to me the 30-day window was at one point in time discussed. Wasn't there a timeline for the submission of expenses?
Senator Benson, yes, there was. We discussed that earlier with the 5 days being the time limit. And as I stated earlier, Mr. Mcgrath did not adhere to that portion of the policy.
Was there, and there was not going to be any consequences for the fact that he didn't do it in a timely fashion? I guess because he was at the top administrator, you all did not have the authority to say to him, because you didn't submit your invoices within the 5-day window, we're not going to reimburse you. That was not possible?
Not as far as I'm concerned, Senator Benson.
What about other employees? If they didn't submit their invoices in a timely fashion, was their invoices recognized and were they paid?
Other employees, as I stated, we didn't have the problem with said delinquency with other employees. They submitted them earlier, after an expense had taken place, seeking reimbursement.
Okay, that's number one. Number two, you indicated that the governor was fully aware of the problem. I mean, the reimbursement and the checks and the financial piece. Was he aware of any of this? Do you know?
Senator Benson, that was never indicated by me. The governor's awareness was around the severance payment, not the reimbursement.
Was he aware? Do you think, was he aware of that?
I'm not sure. I didn't have any direct conversation with him on those items.
So he was not aware of the severance, or he was not aware?
I can't speak for the governor, but not that I'm, like I said, I'm not aware if he was aware of it or not. That was what was stated in the minutes earlier. Mr. Code displayed on the screen.
Okay, now the last question was with the vehicle. you were indicating that the vehicle was that in the, behind the fence or near the governor's mansion? Is that where it was parked?
I'm not sure where it was parked.
Seems to me that, so can you go back and and kind of review with me or with us what happened with the car issue? You said that someone was cleaning the car, and I just want to get a clarification on what happened there.
Mr. Mcgrath expressed that he would be taking a MES pool vehicle with him when he went to work in the governor's office. He had requested that vehicle be washed. An MES staff member washed the vehicle. In the meantime, when he washed the vehicle, he took another vehicle up there, I guess, based on a text message, maybe for Mr. Mcgrath to utilize. And that was the sequence of the events around the vehicle.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Benson. Any questions from other members? I have one follow-up question. So in the closed meeting minutes of that were displayed earlier, it stated, and I think as you read, Mr. Harris, Mr. Snee stated that he told Mr. Mcgrath that he would not recommend that a severance payment be made unless the governor was aware of the proposed severance and did not object. Mr. Mcgrath had assured Mr. Snee that the governor was aware of the proposed severance payment and did not object. You were present during that board meeting, correct?
I was present, yes, sir.
And you heard that, and that's an accurate accounting of your understanding of the sequence of events during that board meeting?
From what I recall, I think that is a pretty accurate sequence of events.
Okay. In August of 2020, the governor put out a statement that said he, quote, did not approve, recommend, or have any involvement whatsoever in any of these decisions made by the board of directors of MES with respect to the former director, Roy Mcgrath, or any other individual. Would you characterize that as being accurate based on what you'd experienced as part of that board meeting?
Well, the governor being aware of the severance, was said by Mr. Snee, and I'm not sure what happened in that case. I was not privy to that. The first that I heard of it, or may have been even the second time that I heard of it, was in that board meeting. I think Mr. Coe had mentioned before that Ms. Hoyten might have mentioned it and raised that point. I was aware of it, from that standpoint, but I'm not sure, who was aware of what, because I wasn't privy to these conversations. I'm just going based on what was stated in that board meeting.
But is the statement that the governor did not approve, recommend, or have any involvement whatsoever in these board decisions consistent with what was conveyed to you as a member of that board during that closed session meeting?
That was consistent, as far like I mentioned before, as Mr. Snee stated, that he and Mr. Mcgrath had a conversation. So I don't know if Mr. Mcgrath told Mr. Snee that, and Mr. Snee took him at his word, or any other due diligence was done in that case.
Okay. All right. Any other questions from other members? Okay, Chairman Barron, anything that you want to add?
I could be wrong, but I think, Mr. Coe, did you have more that you wanted to present before remarks?
I did. I don't have any additional questions for Mr. Harris. I wanted to present just briefly on the attempted alteration of the May 28th, 2020 board minutes. It's Mr. Harris and his attorney, Mr. Berman, do not, I'm not going to ask him questions about this. I simply want to show the committee some documentation regarding that. So if the committee wishes, they could excuse them or whatever its pleasure is.
Senator, is I think not without any, if there's no more questions, now might be a good time to excuse the witness.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Harris, for appearing before this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Harris.
Thank you. Thank you all for your time today.
Chairman Lamb, Chairman Barron, and members of the committee, two of the exhibits shown to Mr. Harris were the open and closed board minutes from the May 28th, 2020 meeting where the severance was approved. Minutes at MES were typically drafted by Assistant Attorney General Sean Coleman, who attended both the open and closed board meetings. He is also very knowledgeable about the Open Meetings Act and assured compliance with it when meetings were taken. When there is a closed session, the open session minutes are required to record the action taken during the closed section, not the discussion, not necessarily the discussion of it, but they're also supposed to record that the board is going into closed session, the reasons, and the items to be taken up. During his tenure, Mr. Mcgrath directed that Mr. Schering receive both the open and closed session minutes and ultimately transmit them to board members, even though he did not attend the closed sessions. And he did not attend the closed session on May 28, 2020. I want to show, what I'm showing you here is a timeline which has some exhibits related to it. And the first is Exhibit 1, which I'll ask to be put up. So this is an email from Mr. Schering to Pam Fuller. Pam Fuller is Mr. Coleman's paralegal. It does not go to Mr. Coleman. And it asks Ms. Fuller, this is June 16th, 2020, the minutes have not been finalized yet, to provide a Word version of the board minutes for review/editing. Exhibit 2 this is a June 17th, 2020 text message exchange, one day after the request to Ms. Fuller, between Mr. Schering and Mr. Mcgrath. And the important part of the text message is on the second page. There's just social exchanges before that, where at the top, Mr. Schering says, "Good morning. We're preparing the board minutes for we're preparing for the board meeting June 25th. Would you like to review the board meeting minutes from May?" And Mr. Mcgrath responds, "Yes, offline." And we do not have an online transmission of the board minutes from Mr. Schering to Mr. Mcgrath. We do not have access to all of Mr. Mcgrath's devices. And so we do not have a document that shows he actually got those board minutes. I'm going to go now to, what's the next one, Julie? 5. This is an email chain that's will start at the earliest email. This is just a repeat of Mr. Sharing's June 16th request for the minutes. And the next is Ms. Fuller responding to Mr. Mcgrath on June 16th, where she says, go ahead. It's essentially Ms. Fuller putting them off. She says Beth and Sean, meaning Beth Boyton and Mr. Coleman, have already reviewed them. If you have any corrections, just let me know and I'll fix on my copy. Mr. Sharing responds the next day, thanking her for the update, but says it's a significantly more efficient process to edit the Word version, as we've done historically, meaning during Mr. Mcgrath's tenure. Please share the Word document. So next, Ms. Fuller on June 17th refers him to a link. 2 minutes later, Mr. Sharing says, thank you, Pam. I do not access the K drive remotely. Can you share via OneDrive or as an attachment? And not long after that, Ms. Fuller forwards the board minutes. Mr. Sharing responded again on June 17th with some minor edits. But then I want to refer you to Exhibit 6. This is an email from Mr. Sharing, and its language is very interesting. It's on Saturday, June 27th, 2020, at 2:52. And he says, please excuse the short notice, but it has been brought to my attention that we have some additional edits to the May Board of Directors minutes. And it encloses updated open session minutes and closed session minutes. He doesn't explain who has brought it to his attention that there are additional edits, and he doesn't explain that we have, who we is, but in light of the earlier text to Mr. Mcgrath, and Mr. Mcgrath and Mr. Sharing's refusal to answer questions about this, the committee can make its own conclusions about that. I'll now show you Exhibit 8. And the email by Mr. Coleman on June 27th, 2020, raises the issue of the Open Meetings Act. It's Saturday and he's not able to review them, and we'll do it that evening, but asks specifically why these changes are being requested. On the same date, Dr. Glass responds, asking that the changes be made as soon as possible. And then I'll refer you to Exhibit 9. Exhibit 9 includes an email from Mr. Coleman to Dr. Glass on that Saturday, 2020. It's redacted because it's attorney-client privileged. He gives advice, presumably, about the open meetings law and the construction of the minutes. And Exhibit 10 is Ms. Fuller's email to Mr. Sharing dated June 28th, 2020, a Sunday, sending the agenda and the minutes, and it includes the statement, Sean has discussed your proposed edits to the closed session with Dr. Glass, and they both agreed the original language should remain. Other edits have been incorporated. Now, I want to show you side by side the minutes of the original board meeting as drafted and as finalized, and the minutes as edited by Mr. Sharing and presumably Mr. Mcgrath. The first are the open meeting minutes. And on the left, we have the MES draft open minutes, which were sent to Mr. Sharing. On the right, we have the Sharing edits. If you will return to the pertinent part, Julie, which is the closed section portion, you can see that the MES draft on the left describes who's present at the start of the closed session. The Sharing edits deletes all that. The MES draft on the left eliminates all reference to the action taken in the closed session, including the fact that the board approved the severance package for Mr. Mcgrath. The Sharing version eliminates all of that, so that if accepted by MES, there would have been no reference in the minutes available to the public that the MES board had awarded Mr. Mcgrath a severance equal to a year's salary, reimbursement for tuition, and the other elements. Mr. Mcgrath, Mr. Coleman, of course, gave Dr. Glass advice that had to remain in there, and the actual decision remained in the open board minutes. Now I'm going to show you a side-by-side comparison of the closed session minutes. On the left is the MES final draft of the closed session minutes. On the right are the Sharing edits. Pam Fuller did not actually send Sharing the draft closed session minutes. So what Sharing did was take the open session, the portion of the open session minutes, and make it the closed session minutes. But on the left, you'll see on page 2, the portion of the closed session minutes, which is highlighted. It says, this is Mr. Snee's report to the board. Mr. Snee had requested that the board approve a severance package, like a severance payment, like the severance that the board had approved for the 2 prior directors. Mr. Snee stated that he had told Mr. Mcgrath that he would not recommend that a severance payment be made unless the governor was aware of the proposed severance and did not object. Mr. Mcgrath had assured Mr. Snee that the governor was aware of the proposed severance and did not object. The closed session minutes created by Mr. Sharing. If you'll refer to the next page, please, Julie. I'm sorry, it's there. If you look at the fourth paragraph, contains no such reference to the governor's knowledge or lack of objection to the proposed severance. Again, Mr. Coleman provided the legal advice, so the final open session minutes include the statement that the severance is awarded, and the closed session minutes include the statement that the governor was aware of it and had no objection. And I'm submitting this to the committee for its information to show the continued involvement of Mr. Sharing in the editing of the minutes of the board, and possibly the continued involvement of Mr. Mcgrath. Thank you, Mr. Chairs. And that is all I have to present today, and we will follow up with staff regarding next steps. Happy to answer any questions the committee has.
Are there any questions from members of the committee? Okay. If not, thank you, Mr. Coe, for your continued work on this investigation.
Happy to do it.
Chairman Barron, anything else? Any closing remarks on your end?
Nothing really. We have a lot more context to digest here. So I look forward to circling back with you, Mr. Co-Chair, and the rest of the committee, and discussing the next steps.
Okay, thank you, Delegate Barron. I think, look forward to continuing to hear about any further developments from Mr. Coe. I think I am concerned about some of the additional revelations that were brought forward as part of this hearing. It appears to no surprise, given the information that we'd experienced before, that Mr. Mcgrath appeared to be living quite lavishly as the director of MES. I think the findings from this afternoon really revealed an alarming lack of checks and balances throughout this process, potentially even with personnel involvement in removing and potentially not filling the internal auditor position. Mr. Mcgrath appears to have had plenty of time to travel around the world, but he couldn't be bothered to find time to submit his reimbursements on time, except years later on his way out the door. And as Mr. Coe pointed out, this concerted effort to change and amend the meeting minutes of the MES board meeting is particularly disturbing, and really shows a concerted, intentional effort to potentially deceive the board and the public. It is deeply troubling that Mr. Mcgrath was apparently using this state agency almost as a personal ATM, to the point where he was emptying the bank account on his way out the door. Literally the last day that he could get reimbursed, he was doing so for activities that took place even 2 years prior. And in fact, even potentially misleading the governor's chief of staff about the amount of cash on hand that the agency had, that they would otherwise be able to use to support state and local governments. It is deeply troubling and shameful to use MES in this way as a state agency, while other agencies and state personnel are being asked to tighten their belts and reduce expenses during a very difficult time early on during the pandemic. I think it showed no limit to the level of shame or level of hubris from Ms. Mcgrath. And in closing, I think we're left with the original question that some of my colleagues had pointed out in earlier hearings, that Mr. Mcgrath had communicated to the board that the governor was aware and approved his severance. The governor stated in a news conference, in fact, in August of 2020, that he, quote, did not know anything and I didn't have anything to do with, it didn't have anything to do with us. And so that is contradicted by the meeting minutes of the board. Somewhere in there lies the truth. Unfortunately, I'm not certain that we know where the truth is yet in this instance. And so Mr. Coe's work will continue on, and we will be in touch with the other members of this board, other members of the committee shortly with additional follow-up as necessary. So with that, why don't we go ahead and adjourn and close this meeting out. I'd like to thank the members of the committee for appearing, and again, thank you, Mr. Coe.